Hey.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Tuesday Night with Night Shift with Andrea Up Late. This is a true crime podcast, but we're going to take it a little bit different tonight. I am the host, Andrea Up Late, and instead of my normal co host of BC Sanders, tonight I have a special Ladies' Night episode planned for you guys. So, if you are a listener, you would know this. If you are new to the show, it's usually a show about often unsolved murders, sometimes missing people. But sometimes we take it back and want to get a little more lighthearted and just kind of have a little more banter in the chats. For those of you who do not know, we do a live YouTube show on the Andrea Up Late YouTube channel every Tuesday night at 8/7 Central. And so with that, if you log into YouTube, it's free. You just have to have an account. You can hop in the chats and talk to us. Often that comes in handy with asking questions about a case as the story progresses, usually on Tuesday nights. And then if you don't want to watch on YouTube or watch it as a show like that, you can listen as a podcast wherever you stream your podcast. Usually it will drop the following day after the live show. So we've got Greg in the chats. We got Abby. We got Disruptors, BC and Ski. I think it's BC specifically in the chats tonight. We got James Barber. And if I missed anyone else, you know me well enough to know that if I scroll up, everything I own will crash and burn and we won't have a show tonight. So I am happy to introduce my co-host tonight, the one, the only Beth of the Bar is Open with Beth and Greg podcast. Hey, Beth, how you doing?
Hi, I'm well. How are you?
Great. We talked that we ought to do this more often.
Yes.
And I think that we should. Maybe we should think of like a regular ladies' night rotation.
I love it. You know I'm in. Anytime you
Yeah.
ask, I'm always like biting at the chops. Yes,
Mhm.
yes. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Heck yeah, let's do it then. So tonight, hey Davey, tonight we are gonna go over a case that I covered a little over a year ago, and you guys tell me what you think because there are certain things that interest me more than others, and obviously I'm more inclined to have a show about those. But there's obviously things that interest a lot of you guys, and you give me that feedback. So we're going to kind of revisit something that initially wasn't really on my radar as something that I cared that much about or interested me that much. And the more I get into it, the more I kind of am. My interest has been piqued. I will definitely say that. Beth, what do you think about aliens? That's a broad stroke question. I'm fully aware.
So I thoroughly enjoy the stories. I'm a little bit of a skeptic because I feel like, so we watch a lot of paranormal stuff, and every show there's like 3 or 4 UFO sightings. I'm like, well, how come I haven't seen one if they're this common? So I go back and like, I love the stories. I need to see one. It's kind of like a ghost. Like I didn't believe in them until I saw one, and now I'm a sucker for them. So I think UFOs would be
Yeah,
the same way.
same.
Yeah.
Same. So maybe we can do that. I was actually chatting just 4 seconds before we got live with a a guy. BC Sanders has done a show with him, the Zen Cop, and he was talking about the same thing, that between alien stuff and then the US being so haunted and the accounts of all that stuff, like his thoughts on it. And so I think that there's a definitely an audience out there for this stuff. So we can definitely revisit these kinds of things more often. And again, it gives us a little bit of a lighthearted, a little bit of a break from a very strict timeline of some unsolved murder or something like that. So I'm with you though. The ghost stuff is a whole different thing, a different train of thought, I guess, if you will,
Right.
and in one capacity. But I'm kind of with you there. I've experienced some things that I wouldn't have otherwise. You know, I'm with you. I'm a skeptic to things, but I'm not hard nosing saying no. So
Exactly.
if I experience something that I can't quite explain, then it is what it is.
Right.
But
As long as I
tonight,
don't get abducted. I don't want to be abducted ever.
so it's funny you say that because in this case tonight, there's definitely some abduction happening, but we have two different ideas on the way it happened and the thoughts and feelings afterward. And these two different thoughts are actually from the two people that were abducted per their account the same night. So you'll see that they come away from this story or from their own story feeling very differently from each other a bit. So we got James Barber in the chat saying, can we hear about y'all's ghost experience? I will leave that up to Beth, and maybe and maybe if we have time at the end of the show, we can banter about that. Otherwise, we could potentially just have a whole different show on it,
Absolutely.
right?
We love to talk about it, so we can definitely do a whole other show on it. I'm
Yeah.
always down for that. Yeah.
And, I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show or not, but I've had these stories a lot with friends and family. But even working in a hospital for many years provides has provided stories of the spiritual realm in ways that maybe one may not think. So I know I've got a lot of fellow nurses that are listeners of the show. I would love for you guys to send me some examples of your stories there,
Yes.
maybe in a hospital setting or in a hospice. Definitely in a hospice setting, I think it makes a lot more sense. But in a hospital setting, it can be a little different. So yeah, definitely send us your experiences, and maybe that could be a show too, Beth, where we
That would
just
be
kind of
fun.
go over everybody else's experiences, right?
Yep.
All right,
Yeah.
you guys send them in. If you've got alien or ghost stories, send them in. And without further ado, we will get to talking about this story and talk a little bit about Beth and what she's got going on in their podcast at the end of this story. So tonight we are talking about the Betty and Barney Hill story. We've got people in the chats talking about how famous this case is, and it really is. It was really the first case. It was like the tip of the iceberg of widespread talk on alien abductions,
Mhm.
and and to start seeing people's thoughts and feelings on this, to start seeing the quote copycats that came from it that later came back, and were debunked, but they were just really excited to kind of be in on this idea of things. This was a time when the world was changing, at least America in and of itself was. This was 1961. So we were kind of getting into this tumultuous climate of political seasons, of, just civil seasons between people. We've got Vietnam's on the radar. We got a lot of things going on. So why not add aliens? All right. So Betty and Barney Hill lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Barney worked for the United States Postal Service. Betty was a social worker for the state. So it goes to say that Barney had very long hours. Evidently, he drove about 60 miles each way to and from work every day that he worked. And Betty was also busy, by all accounts, with her caseloads. So it goes without saying that they could probably use a break. So Betty and Barney were an interracial couple, with Barney being a black guy, Betty was white. So remember, again, this was 1961, and this plays a piece in this depending on your thoughts about their accounts of this night, because sometimes there are some accounts where people um, will kind of throw the interracial couple aspect into it based on duress or pressure or stress or any other thing. So we'll talk about that as we wrap up the case, but just keep those things in mind. So they were both very involved in the civil rights movement, and they were both members of the NAACP. So in September of that year, Betty and Barney were pretty worn down. They were tired from work, tired from the day to day. And so they wanted to do something that was fun for a change. So they made a very impromptu decision to make up a spontaneous trip to visit Niagara Falls and Montreal. Again, keep in mind, guys, they're up in the eastern United States in New Hampshire. So they were considering this to be kind of their honeymoon after about 16 years of marriage. So, in fact, this was so spontaneous, they didn't even have time to visit the bank before they left. So, between the two of them, they had right at $70. Okay. So, I did, on a side note, look at an inflation calendar because I was curious. I had no way to even really assume. Could you assume what that $70 would look like from 1961 to now 2024, Beth?
Um, I would probably say it probably would come out to like 200, $300 maybe in today's world.
Right. Wouldn't you though? How about 718?
Seriously?
Yeah. Now that could be
Wow.
inflation that's happened just in the past couple of years. Maybe it was
Yeah.
200 until a few
You're
years
not
ago.
wrong, but yeah,
And
that's crazy.
but yeah, so their $70 in 1961 would be equivalent to around
Wow.
$720 today in 2024. So when we say that they left the house, they're not going to have cards, they just have cash on them. But it was not that they were without cash. It wasn't like
Right.
us going on a road trip a few hundred
With
miles away with
$70.
$70.
Yes,
Exactly.
exactly.
So they were doing okay. So keep in mind, Niagara Falls is about 500 miles from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where they live. So that was about the kind of trip that they were taking. So then they are coming back on September 19th. They had their 3-day stay away visiting Niagara Falls and Montreal. They stopped in Vermont around 10 p.m. on September 19th to grab a cup of coffee. And Barney was just kind of thinking, if we just grab coffee now, we can kind of drive into the night and be back home before morning. So that's what they're going to do, just try to push through so people will recount or will account that their sleep deprivation may be a cause of some of the things that they say later.
Okay.
So when they are just south of Lancaster, about 150 miles from getting home, they see something that goes on to really kind of change the course of their lives as they know it. So they see something in the distance that they describe as just like bright white lights. Okay. Something is kind of hovering. They don't hear any noise, but excuse me. Barney was a veteran, so he was very well versed in aircraft and these kinds of things. He knew it immediately not to be a helicopter or airplane, anything that he had seen before flying in the skies. So, excuse me. They pay attention. They start to like stop at small like pull-offs and tourist stops to like kind of try to get a good eye on this thing. It's moving around, it's in the distance, and so they just can't quite catch it, right? So next thing you know, it rapidly descends toward their car. It causes Barney to actually stop in the middle of the highway. Okay,
Wow.
there's not much they can do to go around or do anything to it, even though it's off in a field. But they can't possibly drive past it at this point. So it was still silent. They say that it hovered around 80 to 100 feet above their car. They were driving a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air and filled the entire field that they had in front of them. Their whole view from the windshield was just filled with this craft, whatever this was that landed in the field. Okay. So Barney later says that it looked like just like a gigantic pancake, because he will later say, and they drew sketches that I'll throw up on Instagram. They say that it was just flat and round, just like the shape of a giant pancake. So Barney always carried a pistol in his car. He grabs his pistol and gets out of the car and starts to walk toward this object. So they have binoculars in the car, and Betty grabs those. Barney gets them from her and puts them up to his eyes to see what he says was between 8 and 11 figures that he called, quote, humanoid. Okay, so he says he sees these humanoid figures and that they were looking out of the windows. Again, they're around 100 feet off the ground looking down. So he is still using these binoculars to look up at them. All right. So he says that like all at the same time, all of them moved except for one to what appeared to be a panel on the rear wall of the hallway that was kind of encircling the front portion of that craft. There was one remaining figure looking out the window at this point, and Barney says it was looking straight at him. So I'm peeing in my pants now.
I mean, yeah, here's the thing. So 8 to 11, I was like, okay, that's a little nerve-wracking, because that's a lot, especially when there's only 2 of you. And the view he must have had to have such great detail,
With
you
the
know,
binoculars.
with the binoculars. Yeah, that's pretty. I'd never heard that detailed portion of it. So that's kind of crazy, actually.
I don't like it. All right, so it's continuing to look at him, and Barney will say that it communicated a message to him. You will hear throughout the course of this, there's not really talking going on. A lot of what Betty and Barney will say is like messages were communicated. So basically, like just telepathically.
Okay.
I think that Betty will sometimes recount the communication, like almost like in pictures, and so did Barney. In fact, later on with his psychiatrist, said that it was almost like the communication was through like snapshots, like pictures in his brain. So it wasn't like they were, talking with different United States accents or something. So it communicated a message to Barney to say, quote, stay where you are and keep looking. So Barney just felt like he didn't really have a choice. He kind of had to do this thing that it was telling him. So he initially says that they were wearing glossy black uniforms and black caps. Betty will recount that they were wearing shiny blue uniforms, but either way, that's not too far off.
Yeah, they're both
So,
dark.
yeah, exactly. And, it's aliens. So, I mean,
Are you really looking at their outfit? Are
you
you?
might have these memories might have a little trauma thread running through them. So, red lights began to come out of the sides of the aircraft. And then he says that a long structure descended from the bottom. It's still completely silent. He said you could hear a pin drop. And so he says that the silent craft approached to what he will now say, like, it starts to lower itself to between 50 and 80 feet overhead. And it's about 300 feet away from him at this point. Again, if you just tuned in, he's got binoculars. So that's how he's seeing the things he's seeing at in such detail. So he then later says in October 21st of 1961, so the next month, when he was reporting to the NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, he said that the quote beings were somehow not human. So he already knew, like I said, with his experience as being a veteran and just a human being on Earth, that the thing he saw flying in the sky was not anything normal that he would be used to seeing in terms of any aircraft that we normally have. And then now he's saying that these beings were not human. He called them humanoid earlier. So obviously they've got a vein of that in it. So the initial accounts are that I'm just going to put my notes away and we're just going to chit chat, because the initial accounts are that he saw it. They saw this craft. They got out. They immediately ran back to their car in fright and started to drive off. But next thing you know, they were almost like stopped by it. And I think that that's what this was this second time. They will say later that they started to get sleepy, and the next thing they know, they wake up. So we're going to talk about when they wake up, and then we're going to talk about what happened while that craft was in front of them. So when they wake up, there are differing accounts between 2 to 3 hours later and 35 miles away. So the last they know, they're driving, they see this thing. Let's say they blacked out, okay? Like, so for whatever happens, when they wake up, they've lost 2 to 3 hours of time and 35 miles.
No car, right? Their car's not with them at this location? Do you know?
No, they're in their car.
Oh, they're
It's
in
like
their
they've
car.
traveled 35 more miles, and it's 2 to 3 hours later.
Okay. Interesting.
Right?
Like, did they mind control them, or did they suck up the whole car in their little ship and then drop them off at the first stop and go they found?
Right?
It's kind of weird.
Maybe they just like scooted them down the road.
Right. Because 35 miles isn't that much, honestly, like for a car.
It's not that much, but 2 to 3 hours of time is.
Yes, 2 to 3 hours of time is. So you have to
or
wonder
35 miles that you don't remember driving.
Right. Well, what happened in those 2 to 3 hours when 35 miles an hour would take you maybe, 15, 20 minutes, going 60 miles an hour?
Okay. That's fair.
I mean, so then you do kind of have to wonder, like, okay, so what were we doing the rest of the time? Did they take the whole package, and then drop off the whole package? Or it's just kind of weird how, that's a long amount of time for a little amount of distance.
Well, exactly. So when they wake up, they get home. So they drive home. They were, like I said, they were around 150 miles from home when they actually first spotted this craft. So they had made a good chunk of, they were about 3/4 of the way into the drive back home. And so when they wake and they realize they've lost this time, they realize they've lost this distance, they go on and get home. And when they get home, they realize, like, Barney's shoes were scuffed up, Betty's dress was torn, and there was a pink substance, like a pink powder, a pink residue on their clothing. They're just super confused. They don't know what happened. They don't know how to account for this. And so they get home, they go to bed. Some time goes by. They kind of keep it to themselves because they're afraid that people will think they're crazy. They don't know what to say to anybody about this. And so some time goes by, and finally they decide. They started having nightmares and sleepless nights. They just can't, like, kind of really reconcile whatever happened. So they decide to go seek, like, psychotherapy for this. Now, at this time, the idea of hypnosis to recall events was a little more cutting edge, if you will. And we'll talk about what happened under these hypnotic sessions because it wasn't until these that the detail of what they then recollect to be their night comes out.
Well, I
Uh,
imagine that's probably why they also started having a hard time when they were asleep, because that's the brain's way of like remembering stuff and having you remember it via
yes,
dreams, so that probably was disturbing as well. Like, did this really happen? Or am I just having crazy dreams about this experience? Because that would make sense
exactly.
as well, right?
Exactly. We were just with some friends this weekend and talking about like the way the body uh exhibits stress physically. And
Hmm.
so, okay, guys, it was the Super Bowl party. It was like a good time. We weren't just like sitting around talking about something so sterile. But
Right.
someone was one of our friends was kind of having an issue recently where it initially felt like something really, really bad was going on. And after a lot of doctor's visits and scans and things like that, it looks to be like there's just like some numbing of the face and likely contributed to the effects of stress. And then another friend piped up, and the same thing had happened to this friend that, he recounted that years ago with a bunch of job changes and family changes and travel and things like while he's happy-go-lucky guy, he started having this tingling, numbing, and then I've had something with, like, this numbing anyway, so
Is it
your
like Bell's
body
palsy or
it wasn't, that was the initial thought for this one guy,
okay?
but there's no paralysis, there's no other
Hmm.
yeah, it's an interesting case. But I've had a friend who's told me before that, like, her tongue will go numb, like, she can't feel her tongue in her mouth, and she realizes over the years that it's when she's been faced with a lot of stress that
Okay.
while she, um like, consciously doesn't feel stressed or feels fine or feels good, uh, and I think
That's her output.
people who are generally kinda happy-go-lucky, kinda let things roll off of them, your body's gonna feel stressed somehow, so it's gotta come
Right.
out, and so that could play into the idea of these dreams as well, just kinda like you said, at some point, it's gonna and it was taking their toll, nightmares, I would imagine some irritability, now you're losing sleep, you're both
Right.
confused and, a little upset. So they start to go to this hypnotherapist. Now that's another thing, people are in different camps when it comes to how legitimate they consider the science of hypnotherapy.
Hmm.
And we do know that there have been accounts where I think it can be subjective. I won't nerd out on that too much, but I do think it can be subjective in the sense that if someone can get to a completely relaxed state of mind and allow themselves to
Yes.
remember things they maybe have repressed. I think it fully can be a positive thing or a reconciling thing or, an actual thing to happen.
Right.
It's it gets iffy when you're leaving it up to another human though. You know what I
Right.
mean? So when
Yeah.
you're putting your thoughts and memories, meaning a lot of leading questions can be used.
Right.
So this is
It's kind
very
of like the same
subject.
thing of like a fortune teller or a old school psychic. Like they would know, they would ask you just the right questions to get you to give them information that you could then turn around and do something with. Is that what was
Oh
happening
yeah.
when these guys, were being hypnotized? Was he leading them to give them the
Right.
information he could make a conclusion out of?
And I'm not and so Greg in the chat is saying, "Or it can be insane." I'm not talking like I'm gonna hypnotize you and now you're gonna quack like a duck. I mean
Like they
more
used
of
to do
like
in
a
Vegas. Yeah.
more of like a state of like just relaxation fully, and,
Right.
allowing yourself to just kind of be okay with, remembering these things.
Yeah.
Well, we also know though, like that now, like traumatic, like super traumatic events can be repressed, but
Hmm.
then exhibit themselves in the form of DID, dissociative identity disorder, or what used to be called multiple personality disorder. So, like, your brain does something with this
Yeah.
stuff. You know
It
what I mean? It
copes.
doesn't go
It does. It
away.
does what it
So,
needs to do in order to keep going day every day after day. And for
exactly.
some people, it's finding different escapes. So
Sure.
yeah.
Sure. So they do, for better or for worse, go to see this hypnotherapist, and then this is what is uncovered. There's been multiple books. There's actually the Betty and Barney files. You can find the transcripts. You can get audio, which I would like to put on Instagram tomorrow on the Andrea Upload page. If you listen to the audio of their hypnosis
Yeah.
sessions, they have them recorded. And Barney's is quite interesting. he sounds in fear for his life as
Mhm.
he starts to go through this. So whatever you think of hypnosis, he's either a stellar actor or he's letting himself remember something. But either way, you can look these up and find them. So I'd like for you to hear some of those. However, as they're under hypnosis, believe it or not, this is what they said. So Betty says that they eventually are led in. So they get into the craft. It lands. They go up that long ramp or stairs, if you will, into the center of the craft. And once they get in there, they, being Betty and Barney, are separated into two different like sections.
Okay.
So they are no longer able to see each other. So now that's why we have her account and his account, because their stuff took place in different rooms. So they both agreed that there were multiple of these beings, but one was the obvious leader. So one took the lead in all of the stuff that was going on and had this air about him. So again, words are not really communicated. This is all via like
Images.
telepathic. Yeah,
Yeah.
images or telepathically with the thoughts. So it kind of goes back and forth depending on which one you're talking to. So Betty will say that they had her lie on a table. They both kind of describe like a steel platform, like table, rectangular table. So she lies on it, and basically it's kind of the same account that we've heard over and over again, in the sense that like they're checking out her eyes, hair, skin. They take clippings of her fingernails. They use what she describes as like a something that is the shape of a letter opener to kind of scrape skin off of her, but she doesn't recount that as like painful in the way
Right.
that it sounds like. But they're able to scrape kind of like a layer of skin off, and they place that on what she would describe as something that looks like cellophane, what we would know as cellophane. So they collect skin samples, fingernail samples, hair samples. Again, they're looking into her eyes. She says they open her mouth, they're looking in her mouth and her nose. Um, Eventually, they want to find out if she is either A, pregnant or can get pregnant. And they take a needle that she later will say was between 4 and 6 inches, longer than any needle she had seen, and
Mhm.
insert it into her abdomen. At this point, she does feel pain. So she says that this was terribly uncomfortable. And when she communicates this, however, to the leader, he waves his hand like over her belly, and the pain kind of it just subsides, like it washes away. Now, throughout this, she will say that she felt calmed by the presence of the leader of these beings. That she said she doesn't know how to describe it other than she felt like he didn't want her to be uncomfortable. She felt like he didn't want her to be scared. Um, and so having him around, she was much less anxious than when he like was away from her while
Right.
she was in this room. And so basically his minions are all kind of around her doing all these tests and doing all of these things. At some point, she does recall that they run in, there's some what, is transmitted to her as essentially as laughter when they say that his teeth can come out. His teeth can come out talking about Barney. And she laughed and said, "Oh, he has what's called some dentures."
Mhm.
And so this seemed to be like a comical moment for them, something they maybe had not experienced. Okay.
Seen before.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So she's like, "Oh, no." And so she kind of laughs with them when she realizes what they're saying. So again, she's not her at least her recount of this is not one of fright
Not
or
terror.
fear or yeah, it's not terror. It's just weird,
It's
and
different. Right.
interesting and new and different. But yeah, it's not like she has an overall terrible feeling about all of it. So this is all going on with her. At some point, there's a book that the leader has that she wants to look at, and she will say that she cannot remember what it was, but she was very interested in it, like to the point that she wanted to take it home with her,
Mm.
either to read or to have, like I guess evidence, like proof of this encounter. And he tells her essentially in no uncertain terms that she cannot take it with her. Ultimately, she did not, and he kept her from taking it. So that was kind of an interesting little back and forth with the two of them. He also asked, she asked him where they were. So when we talk about their time lost and distance lost, when they came to, we never really talk about this part. We just talk about the fact that I guess I always picture them in a field in this craft.
Mhm.
But she
Because
says,
that's
"Where
where it
are
started.
we?" Yeah, but she says, "Where are we?" As though they've gone off somewhere. They've traveled off. So he says he kind of laughs at her and says, if you don't know where we are, then if I tell you, there's no way you would know. Basically, like it won't help you if I
Right.
tell you. That won't help you at all.
Interesting.
So, yeah, and so she goes to draw they ask her to draw where she thinks she is, and they pull up what is almost like she will describe like something we would have now, like in an Apple store, but in 1961, something incredibly far-fetched. More like a holographic, like a on the wall, touch, kind of
Like an iPad kind of thing.
basically, but I'm picturing like a projector that but touchscreen, right? Like just something that just appears.
Okay.
And so, but keep in mind, guys, like in 1961, this would be quite an imagination to be thinking about those
Yeah.
kinds of things. And so she says that they say, draw where you think you are. And she draws a few things and like stars around. Now, later, let me find my little paper here. Later, there's an amateur astronomer named Marjorie Fish, I believe. And so she sees Betty's map, and evidently she says that it completes a star system that perfectly aligns to what Betty drew, and it's called the Zeta Reticuli.
Okay.
Well, later on, though, this was debunked because Marjorie was found to have fudged the results. So there's a lot of these kinds of things that happen. So if you think about decades ago, in the time when this became more of when they became household names, and this was a very big story, and the book was written, and all these things came out,
Right.
you've got to think there were people who were wanting to kind of latch onto this. So this was an amateur
Absolutely.
astronomer, and she wanted to be like, "Oh, look at this," and then that was debunked. So
I know
there's
exactly where you're at. Yeah.
yeah, and you've got to just
Which
think
can
that
have blowback on them because now people are
even
like,
if it was true, right?
right, well, are they in this together?
Mhm.
Did they make the scenario up so that they could help each other with their 30 seconds of fame? So yeah.
Right. Exactly. So that's essentially the entirety of her account on the craft. Barney's account is not nearly as detailed, not nearly as specific, not nearly as lengthy,
Okay.
and his again all comes through the hypnotherapist, and it's essentially a lot of the same types of things in terms of hair, nails, skin, that kind of thing, but instead of the
Hmm.
needle into the navel like Betty received for like a pregnancy
Right.
test per se, she'll call it a pregnancy test. Um, he did say that he does not remember anything sexual taking place. He does not remember any feelings of orgasm, but that he does know that they took a sperm sample. So he
Okay.
does not say how they obtained it, how that came to fruition, but that
Interesting.
they obtained a sperm sample. And he will say that there was something inserted rectally. But he also will say that it was quickly removed. Now, let's also keep in mind, let's say everything they're saying is true. This is a man in 1961 that is probably, no matter what happened on there, gonna make much lighter of it, right?
Right.
Like, the tube was
Very
quickly
different time.
removed. Absolutely. The tube was quickly removed. He's not gonna look at it like, "Oh, they're gonna realize that something happened to me." He doesn't wanna look like he's any part of it, right?
Right.
So, I have no idea how they obtained it. You know what I mean? Even if he did know, even if things did come to fruition on his end, he's not gonna I really just doubt that in 1961,
They
he's
were very open about
saying that.
it with just like in a regular, capacity, much less a abduction capacity.
Yeah, like, he already didn't really wanna tell people about the abduction or
Right.
that the thoughts that they had been abducted.
Or
So
what
you think
people
he
will
wants to
think of
tell
him if he
people that
talks through that. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah, I loved it. No, that's
Or just even just in general, like, this thing happened and, he might say, "Okay,
embarrassed.
yeah, this happened, like, I'm telling the scientists this is what they did. I wanna tell them everything, but I'm not gonna I'm gonna minimize it as much as possible."
Right.
So that's essentially his piece to it. There wasn't much
So
about
did
him.
was the does it say ever if the main guy that was with her, was he with him at any point throughout this, or was he
Yeah,
just
he
stayed
was.
with
I think
Betty?
he kind of went back and forth. He didn't
Okay.
just stay with Betty, but I think he seems to have spent more time with Betty. Either way, we just don't have as much of an account of Barney's time. I mean,
Right.
kind of what I said about Well, I mean, I told you what they both said entirely. However, like, his was just really short-lived, like, his description of events.
Right.
So, she kinda talks about it at length and, can tell the story over a longer period of time, and he just kinda sticks to the facts, and that was it.
Mhm.
So, he does say that, uh or Betty says that she wanted to remember it. He said that I believe Barney even said that he had wanted to remember, like, when he was in there, he was thinking, "I'm going to remember this, like, to tell
Right.
people, I'm gonna remember this when I leave." I don't know, it almost, like, asserts that they had a feeling that it would be a fleeting memory, I don't know, but that they both had the conscious thought of wanting to remember it later,
Okay.
and that he was told by the leader that the essentially, like, "You won't remember this,"
Okay.
or, "We won't let you remember it," or, "You won't remember it, or you don't need to remember it," however that was worded, and that they did want them to stand and watch them as they flew off. Um, there are different accounts. One source I read said that, of course, we're all hypothesizing now, right? Like, it
Right.
either happened or it didn't. If it did happen, then what would be the reason to say, "Watch us as we fly off." And I
Right.
heard one where, one guy was like, "Well, maybe that was their way of making sure he didn't remember it, or they're, you know, desensitizing." What I don't know, but that was some verbiage that was used. And so basically, like I said, they get back to the car, and as they're getting back, her dress is torn. One part of the cap of the binoculars was broken.
Okay.
His shoes were really
Interesting.
scuffed up. I think her
Hmm.
shoes were scuffed up. Again, her dress was torn, and then that pink stuff, like, there is that pink stuff. I'm gonna scoot over
Substance
because
of some sort.
the thing
Okay.
is right under me. Right. Um, so that's kind of the story in a nutshell. It goes on and on in the sense of, um
You there? We lost you. So, I do know that there was a documentary of sorts about this story on Travel Channel or Discovery Channel. Um, it didn't go into nearly as much detail as you've been able to go into. Let's see what we got going on here. Ah, live podcasting. It's always a surprise.
Always. Can you
There
hear me
we
now?
go. Yeah, there we go.
That was totally my fault. I, like, literally ripped a cable out of the mic. So
Yeah, I
I
don't know
told
if
you, I
you've
can't
heard
even
me,
scroll up in the chat. It's a problem.
right?
Yeah, about a documentary?
Yeah, and I remember we watched it, but I don't think it had quite as much information as what you've given. So it's kind of cool to kind of place those two together. In my head, I was wondering like if the leader spent more time with Betty because women in some minds are more fragile than men. We tend to get maybe a little bit more nervous. Maybe he was there to help her stay more calm
Comfort.
because men don't need that supposedly. But I still wonder, like, I wonder if they gave him the option of no pain, like when they were doing these things to him. Maybe that's why he doesn't remember fully what they did to get what they did. But it's just interesting that he spent more time with her. Like he was almost more comfortable, and or he could tell she was more willing to accept and
Right.
understand what they were going through. Like Barney
Exactly.
sounded like he was nervous and afraid for them. Well, she was like, "Oh, okay. Well, this is interesting. I might be a little nervous, but I'm going to take this adventure, if you will, and process it."
Exactly. So, and to that point, as soon as this was done, they went home again. Like I said, like, time went on before they sought any kind of, psycho, that hypnosis or any therapy or anything like that. But they differed then, like I touched on at the beginning of the show. Betty and Barney started differing in their idea of how to process what they learned about that night through their hypnotherapy.
Mhm.
So Barney was kind of done. He was like, it's done. Let's put it to bed, move right along. Like,
Yeah.
we've figured it out. That's what it was. I don't want to tell anyone. People are going to think we're crazy. I don't want to harp on it. We've gotten our answers. Betty was enthralled.
Yeah.
Some would say she became obsessed. She couldn't get enough. Now, this is where it gets a little, this is where it gets iffy. So, because it was just fact based from the beginning. But no, evidently Betty's sister will have said prior to this that she had some sort of a UFO encounter. So some will say that potentially Betty got the idea in Barney's brain, and then that's when the therapy happened and all this stuff. Almost like she wanted to be a part of what her sister had experienced. I'm not saying that's what happened. That's just some theories on this. I do think it's interesting that two members of the family have had some experiences with this.
Well, so that happens a lot though. They actually take, maybe not, I hadn't heard siblings before, but I've heard like father son. Like there was another documentary we watched where this guy was taken abducted from their they had it wasn't a cottage, it was rather quite big, but that's what he called it, their cottage in upstate New York. And they came to visit him 3 times, and then they never came back until he had a son, and his son was like 11 or 12, and they came back and they were trying to take his son, and he actually stopped them. And so this isn't the first time that I've heard like they kind of make it familial,
Okay, so I wonder if that's to the point that, again, I do not equate, other than the fact that there, people either believe in it or don't. I don't equate aliens and like ghosts as the
Right.
same. You're looking at,
Me neither.
these are two different ideas, but in terms of the same, maybe run in some of the same veins, people who consider themselves clairvoyant or that are more open or able, even if they're not trying to be a medium, but maybe people who are more open and able to feel things, in their soul, if you will, feel a certain kind of energy or presence, or, whatever you want to call it. Right. I do think some people would be more likely to feel those things than others. Some people are more closed off to, whatever, and some are more empathetic to, yeah. So in saying that could run in families as well, right? Because you're going to kind of like, you're not necessarily breeding the same type of people, but you could. And
right.
So,
well, and here's the thing. So this is like, if I'm not mistaken, this is like one of the first.
It was
abductions. And so yep. I think they were clearly, if like, let's say her sister did have an experience, they're in a learning, mode with, okay, so let's take her sister and see how much like it could have just been complete science that they're coming up and saying, let's take a look at this. We got Jane, now let's get Betty and see how they differ because they're family. Just a thought.
No, actually that's a really good thought. I hadn't considered that. But yeah, I mean, for sure. That's really interesting though. And so let's see here. So we have the sister side of things. Mm-hmm. So at that time, and this could be a whole show on its own, and I know it, and those of you in the chats are probably going to light me up because I'm not going to get into detail about it at all because I'm not equipped to. But Project Blue Book was the code name for the study of unidentified flying objects. And this was put on by the Air Force. Now, I got into this a little more in depth the first time I did the show in season 1. And so this may be something, Beth, that you and I could revisit later for another show on this. And this actually was in effect from March of 1952 to December of 1969. So they were kind of smack in the middle of this Project Blue Book going on with the Air Force. The purpose of Project Blue Book was essentially a 2-part goal. It was to determine if UFOs were a threat to national security, and it was to scientifically analyze UFO-related data. So take it for what you will. It was decommissioned in 1969, and they being the Project Blue Book people, determined that none were a threat to national security, but it did collect a total of 12,618 UFO reports during its span. Wow. They concluded that most were more like misidentified or misidentified flying objects that we would otherwise know about, or natural phenomena like clouds, stars, other types of stuff in the galaxy, or just conventional aircraft. Other things that they learned later would be like, let's see here, the flights of formerly secret reconnaissance planes that they didn't know about at the time. So in 1952, they might not have known about them. The U-2 and the A-12. There's differing opinions or statements about its discontinuation, but it was stated that it was discontinued due to lack of funding. In 2003, the United States Air Force publicly stated that no immediate plans to reestablish any official government UFO study programs, but it did disclose in 2017 that a new secret UFO study titled Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program was funded from 2007 to 2012. And now we've got the Mexican alien. So,
yeah. It's crazy because we find out all these things, right? Like the government has been involved in all this stuff. And they fought so hard to like have people believe it until like 2 or 3 years ago when they came out with this like whole, hey, look, we've seen aliens. Here's some video recordings of it, So it's always hard for me to like fathom and listen to them about, we weren't part of that. I'm like, were you or weren't you? Because I'm pretty sure you probably were. There is go ahead.
So I just said I don't listen to a thing.
Yeah. No. Right. Not if you. Anyways. But so it's hard to know from like that perspective of like how much did they know? How much have they been covering up? Why are they deciding now is the right time to let the cats out of the bag, if you will? That stuff fascinates me because I'm like, why was it wrong in 1995, but now it's the right time in 2023? And there's a lot of stuff that goes with that coming out. They've got the pilot videos from different views and areas. You've got like commercial pilots have claimed for a long time that they've seen UFOs, so it's kind of funny to be like, why deny it anymore, especially now that you've decided to open up the book and let us see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild. And that's what I meant, by the way, for anyone just tuning in. When I said Mexican alien, I was literally joking about the picture
the guy.
It said it was
the paper mache aliens.
Yeah, the paper mache alien.
Was that in Chile or where was that? That was somewhere.
No, it was somewhere in Central or South America.
Yeah. And see, that's the problem because that isn't the first time he's tried to do something like this and been debunked. And so that's why I think sometimes people have,
of course,
myself, a hard time saying, are aliens real? Are these just things that people have done? Some better than others, obviously. But is this just something somebody's done to try to get some publicity,
And like you've touched on throughout this show, what's unfortunate is that, let's say everything they're saying is true. And I'm not saying it's not true, like, I don't know. But let's say everything they're saying is true. There have been enough people who have woven themselves into this story that are debunked or that do, really take a notch out of the truth of it, that it's like, it makes it more difficult, to the point that you're saying. So it makes it more difficult to believe, which kind of really stinks. I will say that Kathleen Marden is the name of Betty's niece, and she took it upon herself to further this cause and really continue to push for Betty and Barney's story. Betty's niece she continues to give interviews. She's written books devoted to her late aunt. However, then she kind of gets out. She works for that, what is it? Whatever. What's the one? Marfan, whatever. She.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Marf or something like that.
Isn't it? You guys, I've got it in my notes somewhere. These are old notes. Either way, the problem is at first she's really championing her aunt's cause. And then she kind of goes on to start talking about how she thinks that the aliens are just worried about our planet. And then she talks multiple times about how the aliens are afraid that we will eventually use nuclear weapons.
So and she's not necessarily, she might not be wrong, right? But that kind of takes a little bit of
Take some wind out of those sails.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how is she just crazy? Or is she, you know?
Okay, so then to that point, Betty went on for years to come, essentially for the rest of her life, to want to talk about this, which is fine. Everybody kind of copes differently. So she wanted to talk about it. Barney did not. But Betty went on to say she had claims that she was abducted then multiple times after this, between this time and the end of her life. Barney died in 1969, so only 8 years later, at the age of 46, of a stroke. Betty went on to live until 2004, when she died at the age of 85 of cancer. So until her 85th year, I mean, she continued to be on TV shows, taking interviews, and continued to talk about this. And like I said, would then say that.
Sorry, my cat's joined the party.
No, you're fine.
Go on.
And then he's quiet. It's fine. And then would say things like, you know, like that she was continually abducted.
And again, there's a lot that points to that too. A lot of people say that they're abducted. You've heard the ones, right? Like people are saying they find trackers in them. There was one guy that had a piece of metal in him that the doctors just could not get it out. Like they just, no matter what they did surgically, they couldn't get it out. So it's almost like
I don't know about that one. I'm gonna have to look
find. I'll have to find the name of it. I'm sure Greg might know, but they find somebody, and it's almost like they do a lifelong study on them to see what happens in their life to them. So,
well, I mean, we track dolphins.
Right.
And sharks and do tests, right? I mean, we draw blood on them. We pull them back up on the boat and draw blood.
We put cameras on them. You know, we do all sorts of stuff. So who's to say that we're not their science project?
And then unfortunately, to the threat of other things debunking things, then we know that a common symptom in paranoid schizophrenia is feeling as though you're being watched or tracked, or that you have something in you that's tracking you. And, you know, I mean, like, so, and both things could be true, right? You could have someone who's got a legitimate
some reality to it, and there's to be some craziness to it.
Yeah, so you can have a mental disorder, and then you can also have potentially this going on. So it could go either way, but it's definitely, it's worth a chat.
It's a great story too, because of the fact, like earlier, it is one of the very first abduction stories that was introduced to the public, you know, so there's always that that aspect of it, that it's so exciting because it was the first one, and so unbelievable because it was the first one. You know, they were far and few between back then.
Exactly. So some of the thoughts on it were that, I mean, I think the first time I did the show, some people thought that they were on LSD and that it was like a government, you know, when the CIA was doing all this stuff with LSD. I don't think so. They were driving down the road. Which I know that they put people in harm's way when they were experimenting with this, but I'm not sure what Betty and Barney had to do with why they would have been in the eyes of the CIA for any kind of reasons. But who knows, I guess. I don't think that this was a drug situation, though.
Especially unless, I mean, you'd have to think about how they got it into their system. They were drinking coffee, so perhaps somebody, you know, spiked their coffee, but that seems like an off chance because they were on a road trip that nobody knew they were going to take.
Exactly.
You know, so that seems a little far-fetched, but
I think that was a little far-fetched. I think some people had said something about, like I said before, the duress of like the racial tension between being an interracial couple. First of all, they were in New Hampshire and they worked closely with the NAACP and civil rights movement. So, I mean, they seemed pretty progressive for the time. I'm not sure how much stress they were under.
Because, you
know, I'm sure more so than now, but, you know, I don't think that necessarily was providing this. I've not read anything as of present that said that, you know, that they would talk about that they were having big problems with that or anything like that. There was one of the sources I read said that, like, when you hear his voice, like, he's not making up the terror in that hypnotherapy session. That's recorded. He's not, I don't think he's feigning the terror. Again, I'll try to put that one on Instagram on Andréa Update, but it's like it sounds like someone fearful for their life. The way he screams as he's recounting the event. So some of the sources will say that, okay, but maybe that's not what happened to him. Maybe something did happen to them on the side of the road there. And she already knew that her sister had seen aliens, kind of got it in her head, and maybe a trauma response, whatever, and has now, like, that's that's kind of become the story for them, like whether it's conscious or not, that's what
Mhm.
happened, in a way to not have to think about what really happened to them. I don't know. Any of these things are far fetched. I just think that I say far fetched. I mean, any of these are all just like wild speculations on all of our parts because we weren't
Right.
there and they were, and this is what they say happened.
Right.
But
And we will never be able to say true or false because we weren't there, you know? So
exactly,
I
for
think it
sure.
has to be down to the person and what they want to think is possible. You know, do I hope there's aliens out there? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? Depends on if I've just watched a scary alien taking over the world movie. Then no, I don't want them to be real. But, in the aspect of, I have a neighbor who we love to call her, say she's woo woo. She's very woo woo. She's like, no, aliens are peaceful. I can communicate with them. And I'm like, okay, have some more alcohol and tell me what they say. But I think
I
it
don't
just
think that's
depends.
alcohol.
Yeah, no, well, she's into centering herself, and she's got,
Crystals,
yeah, crystals, and she's a Reiki master, and so she's really
cool.
into a lot of that astral projection stuff. So
Gotcha.
that could be, how she's experiencing these, but
Do you
she
mind if I
swears.
ask what age range she's in?
Yeah, she's in her early 40s.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, why, do you have a theory on that?
Yeah, I'll tell you off air.
Okay. But so yeah, so it just depends on who you talk to, when you talk to. Is it good, bad, ugly? Who knows? I think from all accounts, right? There's all kinds of aliens. Like, well, you've heard some that are like Amazonic, beautiful, light blue skin, very peaceful. Then we hear about the gray insect-looking ones, and those are the mean ones that hurt people. So I
Yeah, so
guess
I've
it depends
actually
on your experience.
true, or your perception of your experience, right? So I've
Yeah.
got somewhere you guys can see the notebook paper's flying like snowflakes around here. So the grays, and so again, I'm
Yes,
not
the
gonna
grays.
we're gonna kind of wind it down, but there are different classifications of these beings, right? And so they
Right.
kind of all have different ideas of their almost like their rank or like their status within this alien community, if you will. And so the grays would be what Betty and Barney would categorize as what they experienced.
And the grays are the
Um,
most common, right? That people see with the
I
bigger
believe that's
head.
what's most. I think that is what's most rendered, like in artistry and movies and things like that, for us in a pop culture sense. So they had big eyes, slits in the face, where nostrils would normally be, no lips, no ears, black shiny suits, and that's what Barney said. And I think she said blue, barrel chested. The Greys are thought to be intelligent and like more so than the others. They are supposed to be considerate, which that's how she described the quote leader of this group of aliens. Another type there's another type that's more like in a militant uniform that would be considered less friendly and a bit maybe less intelligent. So take that for what you will, but it's interesting now that they talk about them wearing these shiny suits, and it's like at some point the idea of them for us has transitioned to where it's I don't think that we see clothing on them when we talk
Yeah,
about them
yeah,
anymore, right?
mostly, yes. Well, and I
But
was just laughing at myself though, because I was saying, like, I'm definitely a skeptic, but I seem to know a whole lot about them, which is kind of funny. I guess because it just lines up with
you're
our,
interested,
I
yeah.
am, and I love stuff like that. I love the unknown, and from all aspects, because it just proves there's so much more for us to experience than what we do every day. So that's what makes life exciting, unless it
Right.
hurts. I
Well,
don't
and
want
it
it to
just
hurt.
made me I don't want somebody taking anything but my fingernails. But
Right.
it just made me think, like, kind of chuckling a little bit, like the idea of like the picture that we have of like Jesus as Americans, that like a lot of people's grandparents had on their wall. That's like this blonde and blue, like European Jesus.
Hmm.
Whether or not you believe in Jesus, either way, he would have been of Middle Eastern descent. So
Right.
he wouldn't
We
have been
picture
blonde
him,
and blue. He
yeah,
wasn't
exactly.
Finnish. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
that's not, so like aliens, did they wear suits? Do they not wear suits? Who knows? Maybe
Right.
that's
It's
changed
all
over the years.
interpretation, right? And
Our
your
perception.
interpretation is about your environment. So that's the crazy
Yeah.
part.
Absolutely. Oh my
I could
goodness.
be like
How
the
are you doing?
X-Files and say, I want to believe.
Yeah, right. Trying to, I can't. Oh my goodness. How have you been, Beth?
Good, good. We've been busy, which is always good. I don't know if you know, but Greg started a new podcast with our buddy Peter McGuire. It's called Baldy and the
Okay,
Big
I've been
Guy.
seeing this one come through. Yes, tell
Yeah,
us about it a little bit.
it's funny. It's just them being boys, talking about different things that are happening in the world. Peter is a trained chef, so they do a lot of
Oh,
food talk on there as well as do some food videos. So it's literally, I think they only have a handful of episodes out. So they're just getting off the ground. So he's busy with that. He's busy, with our podcast, The Bar is Open. Um, and then we have the one that's behind me, the Castro Files, which is our paranormal
yes.
show where we get into a lot of aliens and ghosts and cool stuff like that. So
So that's what I
this was
wanted to
right up
tell
when you said you wanted to do this. I was like, heck yeah, man, this will be fun. So
yes. And that's what I want to tell the listeners for this show now is that you guys do have multiple podcasts now, but the Bar is Open with Beth and Greg is, I guess you would consider your mainstay, right? And
yes,
then
yep,
the Castro Files is a lot of fun. So guys, if you're interested in this type of thing, the supernatural, the kind of wacky, fun, weird stuff,
yep.
yeah, I just became Johnny Carson, I think. But then you need to check out the Castro Files, and that'll be right up your alley. And then the Bar is Open does a lot of like current topics,
Yeah.
those kinds
We
of
try to
things.
make that one fun.
It's a
Not
lot
try
of
to get too
fun.
serious. Yeah.
They also have people in the chats. It's also a live YouTube show as well. And so if you follow them on Instagram at the Bar is Open with Beth and Greg, you will see information for their podcast there, and it'll show the offshoots of their other stuff. So just like he said, Baldy and the Big Guy, that's the newest one that Greg has going on with his buddy. So let me ask you, you said Peter is the name of his co-host there?
Yes, Peter McGuire.
Now, does Peter live close to you guys?
He does. He lives probably, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes. So
I just know that you guys always do a post-show meal picture in your
yes,
stories, and
that's
so you
just
just
for
said that
that's
he's a
just for the
trained
bar is
chef.
open. Yeah. Well, you know what? I say that, but like 2 weeks ago, his video just came out. He made stuffed burgers for all of us after they got done with their show, and they were absolutely
I'm
delicious.
just saying, you might want to work that like
So
any way you can, Beth.
yeah. You feed me, you can come record at my house whenever you want.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So and it's fun. So all of them are fun. They keep us busy, as you know from your experience with doing your show.
Oh gosh, I've only got the one, so I don't even know how y'all do it.
Greg, a lot of Greg. That man has boundless energy. So he's always going. So it is fun. It does take some work, but it's a good time. It's always a good time.
And you guys, if I'm not mistaken, still have kind of continuous merch at Minor League Studios, correct?
Yeah, we do have merch over there for Castro Files and the Bar is Open. There's some great. I was drinking out of a wine glass the other day that's pink and it's got a little alien face on it. It says the Castro Files. And one of my girlfriends was like, "You should give those away as a gift." I was like, "That's a great idea, actually."
Oh,
so,
absolutely, you should.
Yeah, we have some great merch out there for both shows. So, yeah,
for sure. Well, you guys, thanks for listening in. Beth, thank you so much. As always, we always say we should, but I say let's do. So we will get it on the books to do kind of a regular every 2 weeks ladies' night. Absolutely. I would love it. That would be so much fun. Yeah. And thanks for all of you who listened. Here comes the boring part of the show where I say, please like, subscribe, hit all the buttons, do all the things. None of it costs a dime. It takes no time at all. Hit the download button. I would really appreciate it. So it's going to be the Andréa Up Late channel on YouTube, and Night Shift specifically if you're looking it up on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen and stream, you can listen to it there. Rate, review, star, whatever. I understand it's a pain in the rear, but it also helps a whole lot. And
but it benefits you a lot. So
it does. And it's something that, and I've said it before, but I've listened to podcasts for years. I've, watched YouTube channels for years and never thought to do it. Like it didn't occur to me or matter to me to do it. And now that I realize just that one button click makes a big difference to the people you're doing it for.
Well, and I like this phrase, sharing is caring. So if you already are a subscriber, go out and share her with some of your friends. get them the link and
I like
share,
that.
on your social media, share her page so that you can help her grow her podcast.
Oh, and you as well. I like that a
Yeah,
lot, Beth. Thank you very much.
of course.
So yeah, so do that, and same thing. So go over to Instagram to the Bars Open with Beth and Greg, and that'll open up the portal to all of their multiple shows and
So
other
all things
accounts.
LaMontagne, correct? Yeah.
And then yes, all things La Montagne. And so you may not know it, but I secretly call y'all La Montagne every single time I can. When I
My
use your
mother used
name,
to call us that,
that's
so
the
we
only way
love
I
it.
can say it. Yeah, it's the only way
Yeah.
I can say it. So so do that, and also you can follow them on YouTube as well under the same name. So you guys, we thank you for tuning in, and we will be back to regularly programmed shows next Tuesday in terms of unsolved crazy crime, true crime stories on Night Shift with BC Sanders as my co-host. And until
Thanks for
then,
having me and let me share some time with your friends and family on the chat. So I appreciate
thank
it.
you so much. I
Yeah,
really,
of
really
course.
appreciate you coming on. It's always a great time, and we will
Yes,
definitely do
ma'am.
this again very soon.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, you know what, guys? Until next week, we will see y'all next Tuesday.
Bye, guys.